Hi, everybody. We'll get started in just a few moments. But first, let me tell you about custom content. Picture this, your vision perfectly captured with stunning images or videos made just for you. At Getty Images, we've got over 550,000 creators worldwide bringing fresh, authentic, and diverse perspectives to life. Tapping into the latest visual GPS data-backed insights and our decades of expertise to help guide them. So you don't just have to picture it. From concept to creation, we can partner with you to make it happen. Reach out to your Getty Images representative to execute your vision with custom content. Or scan the QR code and complete the Contact Me form. All right, folks, today's episode of The Download Presents starts now. On today's program, Getty Images Head of Creative for the Americas, Tristen Norman, sits down with Morgan Stanley, Executive Director of Brand and Design, Bill Anstad, Media by Mother, CEO and Founder, Dave Gaines, and AT&T Director of Brand Design, Oliver Dudley. Plus, we'll take your questions live in our Q&A. It's all happening on the Download Presents Visual GPS Chaos Mode. Hi, I'm Jennifer Kelly, Senior Customer Success Manager here at Getty Images, welcoming you to this special edition of the Download Presents. Before I throw it over to our amazing panel, just a few housekeeping items. If this is your first time joining us, well, welcome. We'd love to make this a regular thing, so make sure to follow Getty Images on LinkedIn for updates on when there will be a new episode. As always, I want to give a special shout out to all of our current Getty Images customers and thank you for your business. We truly appreciate it. Portions of today's program have been pre-recorded, but don't forget to drop your questions below and we'll answer them later in our live Q&A session. And yes, today's episode is being recorded. In a day or so, we'll email you a link to this session on our dedicated show page. And feel free to tell your colleagues about it too. All right, the house is kept. Here to present and moderate today's panel is our Head of Creative for the Americas, Tristen Norman.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to our roundtable discussion today, Chaos Mode, Visuals in a Time of Upheaval. I'm excited to be here today. My name is Tristen Norman, and I lead the creative team for the Americas. Now, before I introduce my amazing panelists, I just want to tell you a little bit about why we're here. Everything is unsettled, and our notions around what's real and the social contract, they're all adrift. And trust continues to implode. And even though the economy has proven to be a lot more resilient than any of us have ever expected, the vibes feel incredibly off. And everyone at all levels of society are really in moments of feeling like everything is chaotic. So the question is, what does it mean to operate as a marketer in this space and during this time? What does it mean specifically for your industry? And how can you visually innovate in a time where chaos is reigning with no signs of a slowdown? So that's what we're going to get into. Today, I'm joined by a star-studded panel of marketing and advertising experts, practitioners across industries, and some of my new friends. So I'd love for them to introduce themselves, and I'd like to start with Oliver. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your organization, and your role?
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Tristen. My name's Oliver Dudley. I'm currently at AT&T. I work for the brand design team, which is part of a larger brand team. I've been there for about 8 years now. My career has largely been in advertising, right now branding, and also a large digital focus as well.
Thanks, Oliver. What about you, Dave?
Yeah, hi everybody. My name's Dave Gaines. I'm at Mother. More specifically, I started a media agency for Mother about 5 years ago. Prior to that, I was with WPP for about 20 years, but across about 14 countries, various different roles. Yeah, I'm very happy to be here today covering this topic.
Thanks, Dave. And last but certainly not least, Bill.
Thanks, Tristen. Bill Anstad here. I'm head of brand and design at Morgan Stanley. So I sit within firm-wide marketing, managing all things brand, visual identity, and tone of voice. And I've been here almost 15 years now, so it's been a long tenure. But prior to this, I really worked in the fashion and retail space, doing a lot of photo shoot, art direction, video direction. I've always been passionate about photography, so looking forward to the discussion today.
I love this cross section of industries, of roles, of experiences. It's going to be, I think, a really powerful conversation. Now, before we dive into the meat, the seitan, the tofu of the discussion, I just want to orient all of you to how today's going to go. So I'm going to be in conversation, as you all know, with this incredible group of professionals. But we're going to talk about what it means to be a marketer in this moment. And then we're going to dig into some provocations on how that specifically relates to visual culture. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to use Getty Images' own proprietary research as jumping off points for that discussion. In fact, any data that you see is going to be underpinned by that visual research methodology, say that 5 times fast, called visual GPS. And what that is it just combines our data about what brands are using when it comes to visuals with regular primary quantitative research across markets around the world about the changes, the attitudes, and even the visual appetites that most likely impact visual culture. And the hope is that all of this will help leave you from this discussion with some tangible and actionable steps to make in your own visual strategies. So without further ado, let's get into it. First I want to talk about chaos mode. Like, it's important to sort of understand this moment, right? The Oxford word of the year in 2025 was rage bait. Not sure if you knew that. And if you don't know what rage bait is, it's basically content that's created and promoted with the express purpose of enraging so that you can get more engagement as a brand and thus more eyeballs on your content. Now, it's interesting to see that as a term has sort of entered the chat and continues to permeate the zeitgeist. And what it signals is that we're beyond this sort of erosion of trust. In fact, we're kind of doubling down as a society on grievance. And it's leading not just to pessimism, but it's also leading to anxiety. In fact, when we look at understanding where people are, more than half say that thinking about the future makes them incredibly anxious. And it's really causing questions around faith and confusion and everything we encounter in our lives. And the impact of this moment is really widespread. It's reshaping everything we as practitioners understand to be true about how culture moves, what media means, how literacy works, and what expectations we have. So that's where we're going to start with our first question. As marketers and brand leaders, what's causing the greatest anxiety for you and your teams in this current moment?
I would say there, certainly is a lot of different factors in terms of geopolitical, amongst other factors here as well. So, in our industry, we're definitely having to respond a lot in terms of how those affect people's investments and how they're feeling about those things and how we go to market. I think creating a sense of ease and thought leadership and authority about it. And so, when it comes to how that comes down to visualization in that and anything that we're packaging with that, being very mindful to not, I think, add to any kind of sense of alarm, right, or fear-based kind of narrative too.
I feel like we're doing the same type of thing in the telco space. It's less to do with sort of the environment right now. It's more just to do with the fact that there are outages and connectivity is something that people assume. You get noticed when it's not working. So I think that sense of, and this isn't just sort of putting the pressure on imagery. I think there's lots of levers that we pull as marketers and designers and brand people and advertisers to talk about reliability, to convey that sense. And sometimes that's just by doing rather than seeing or saying. AT&T has the guarantee right now. And I think that's really just sort of demonstrating those kind of qualities that we need to be showing. How that sort of expresses itself in photography, I think there's sort of 2 things happening right now. One is there is a greater fluency amongst the market of just good taste, visual sort of aesthetics, that type of thing, compared to a long time ago. I used to have a lot of banking clients, and it was very easy to stand out in that category, maybe 20, 25 years ago. Now it's not. There's also a lot of challenger brands that are sort of very distinctive. So I think it's that balance of reliability, trust for a almost 150-year-old company, but also being distinctive, because I think there's sort of a certain averaging of aesthetics. As much as we sort of want to try and comfort during sort of uncertain times, I think that there's also a need to not appear average or dull or too comforting. I think we need to sort of have a point of view. And I think that needs to come out in our photography a little bit.
Yeah, that sea of sameness is something that we talk about quite a bit, and how we can be distinct. I know it's a theme that, we'll dig into here as well, but it's something we do think about quite a bit in terms of looking at competitor landscape, and also just beyond that, not also tying ourselves too closely to that, but really thinking about what is genuine based on audience, and really what's going to resonate best with them based on the content.
Yeah. Dave, anything to add?
Yeah, I think there's been a bit of a shift, I think, in the last, I would say even 18 months. We've gone from, it's kind of interesting working inside a creative shop from a media role, because media has gone from a world where 50 years ago or more, less than that, your role was to be the least controversial you possibly could, because if people switched off your TV station, you've lost half the country. And then as we got to kind of 2015, the job almost became to be the most controversial you could, because you're working in an attention economy. And both users of media, but brands, I think, have reached a point of exhaustion somewhat with that. And we're now finding there is a need to make it clear that you have a slightly more mature and professional tone of voice. Visual identity is incredibly important because of the short time that people are seeing content. Not that long ago, we were exposed to about 500 ads a day. Now that figure is supposed to be around 6,000. So you've got 2 or 3 seconds to get across what you're trying to do. And that with content often, and it's going to become more important as agentic search comes in, is making sure that you've got some consistency in your visual identity. Because if people remember that you're blue or you're red or you're yellow, that's kind of half the job these days in terms of landing a brand. And being a little bit more sensitive to the cascading of kind of relatively awful content that people can come across in a social feed. When we speak to younger folks in particular, there's almost a respect for brands that don't try and operate in that environment and game the attention economy. They are almost trying to do the counter to it. And I think that's a shift we've seen probably within the last couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, you all have pointed out so much. I mean, the importance of being sort of this stabilizing force for your audiences, the importance of being incredibly reliable, the importance of sort of navigating a time where you have the most sophisticated, I think, consumers and audiences than we've ever encountered, as well as just the noisiness, and Dave, that's that. I mean, we've thought about that too. I mean, the amount of visuals you are inundated with day in and day out means in order to cut through, you really have to kind of set yourself apart. And the way that you set yourself apart, not by playing the game of the sort of attention economy. In fact, it's which a lot of brands, I think, is a trap door they might be falling into, but it's actually kind of transcending it and being that sort of staying true to yourself and finding that authentic brand voice, which I think is incredibly powerful.
I think that's a really interesting point. I think that it's interesting that you mentioned color, Dave, because I think in maybe over the last sort of 10 years, there was a sort of a big brand trend where you're sort of every color and any color. That didn't exist in our space because you've got those maps that never go away of coverage across the continent. So color's important in our space. So it's something that we still need to lead with. But yes, that it's an interesting point, which is how do you stand out quickly? How do you still sort of be reliable without being safe and without sort of looking and feeling like a lot of that sort of a lot of the imagery that's out there? But also, there's a lot of discussion going on around this is media. It's also branding. Like there's sort of click harvesting. It's a real sort of crutch. You can get into that sort of pattern very quickly and very easily, and probably a lot of brands have done that for a long time. Everyone knows how that works, and so everyone starts to sort of feel the same. And it's not very genuine. It's sort of your point of view, your look, your feel. It's all driven by what you're seeing already out there. So I think how to be distinctive, but also reliable, those types of things. I think that's the challenge for us, especially with photography.
Yeah, I want to throw a spanner in the works here because I think Dave kind of alluded to this and this idea of agentic search. I want to kind of name the elephant in the room, which is artificial intelligence writ large and how it's impacting visual culture as well. Like it's also kind of making folks question what they're encountering in media and whether or not what they're encountering in terms of imagery is real. In fact, we are surveying over time because obviously this has a direct impact on how we think about and produce visuals, is how to stand out. What happens when the images that people are encountering are encountering, they have questions about whether or not it's real, whether or not it's made by a real person, whether or not it's conveying some sort of truth. How do you think this is changing how you all make choices amongst your teams?
I think it's changing every day. I think as the tools also and the output quality of them continue to improve, it brings these questions even more into light around what is genuine, what is not. I think we see both, whether it is news stories that ultimately can even get sensationalized, right, by AI content that might cause additional alarm, or ads that were being served in a social feed where maybe right now it's very easy to clock, right, what is AI. It's something that we're also thinking about internally of what should we, even as a company and marketing organization, do and what should we not do, right? In terms of rules of the road, it varies by state even, right? So like in New York State, for example, there's, quite a lot of legal factors to be mindful of around what we're bringing to life as we think about pulling those levers also.
I think we're going to see massive changes in the next 24 months, I think. Agentic search is going to collapse the kind of pointy end of the funnel that you're referring to, Oliver. So this kind of click harvesting thing. I mean, the hallelujah moment is all of these terrible little banners and buttons that have made the internet look ugly for so long will disappear because a robot doesn't care about your crappy little ad.
Yeah.
But it does mean you're going to end up with, even if you use ChatGPT's Atlas at the moment, there's some good clues as to how this world is going to work. You can still say, get me a flight from New York to Chicago, and it will book you a flight. Probably won't be the right price, wrong time of day, etc. But we're vaguely on the way there. So agentic search will be these little task robots. And our job for content in marketing is going to be generating two sets of signals. One is kind of signals of eligibility being, I found an airline, it goes to Chicago, it's at this price, etc. The other signals are going to be signals of preference, which are going to be about brand. And I think we're in for a very pleasant new world where brands have to get simpler about what they say. And if you're not consistent about the things you say in your ad, on your site, it comes up in reviews, you won't necessarily get surfaced. So our job as agencies, for example, we're probably going to be judged at some point by, well, did my brand surface X amount of times when agentic search went to work? Because if it didn't, then my content isn't doing the same thing as I say on my site. It's going to be a bit clunky for a while because content's going to work in different ways in different walled gardens, etc. But it will mean that we're probably going to see somewhat of a eradication of lots of this terrible content. And I'm in two minds about AI because AI is in some respects, is a very efficient production tool. But my hope is that what it does do is allows really good ideas and really good brands, really good kind of North Stars to surface. I mean, banners and buttons are still produced by machines now. It's just very ugly content instead of its video. So we've lived in this world of machine produced content for a good decade. It's just really ugly.
Bill, Oliver, anything else you wanted to add? Navigating this moment?
No, I mean, other than just, I agree with Dave. I think that ever since there was a search engine, there were sort of hacks and tricks and trick throughs and fake landing pages, and they were pretty clunky and easy to seed out. I think the more sophisticated that gets, the more we sort of have to raise our hands and just sort of be, like we said, sort of consistently ourselves, and not have to sort of say one thing to one market or flex this way on a different social handle. It's really sort of understanding who are we, why are we doing what we're doing, and where do we have permission to say certain things, but for that to have sort of like a through line that's consistent and to simplify what we say as well.
Yeah, that's pretty consistent with where brands want to be. I don't know if you all follow Edelman. They do a regular study on trust, and one of the things that they uncovered in the last couple of years is that brands remain the most trusted sort of institution, if you will, beyond sort of our government, beyond sort of NGOs, beyond even institutions of faith. It's really been a place that has become this source of truth. And there's a lot of theories as to why. I think there's a lot of agency in your choice of brands and who you align yourself and what products and services you align yourself to, perhaps is one reason. Either way, it almost underscores what you all are kind of all saying in different ways, is that this consistency and this authenticity of voice is incredibly powerful. And, in fact, in that research by Edelman, there was a finding that 3 in 4 people around the world want brands to authentically reflect what's happening rather than sort of shying away from it. And that introduces attention, right? Because we're kind of going back to this kind of way of operating. It's like, how do we reach the masses in this way without causing any sort of controversy or alienating certain audiences? How do you sort of ride the wave of the moment, while still staying true to your sort of voice? And that actually brings us to kind of this next section of the conversation. Welcome to New York City, everyone. By the way.
Might have been me.
That's okay. But it introduces that next section, I think, of this conversation where we talk about like specifically visuals. So one of the things we look at as a team are what are the most popular visuals over a given period of time. Now, when we think about, this moment, chaos mode, as we're talking about, and even Dave kind of alluded to this, it's been like the last 18 months. I'd say the last maybe 3 years, it's just been year after year of like constant change and tumult and upheaval. And what's interesting is that if you look at the visuals that are popular over that time worldwide, meaning that they've been selected by the most number of brands year on year, there's a little bit more of a different and slightly more static story being told. It's almost as though something is not happening outside. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think kind of gets at that idea of reliability and trust and consistency. But the question we're always asking is, what is this leaving out? So that's kind of where I want to start. One, I want to hear from all of you, or one of you, what do you think is driving some of this stagnation? If you had any theories of kind of this static set of choices that brands are tending to make.
I think it is safeness in a lot of cases and choices. I think that there's sometimes over reliance on data that we're looking at, right, and equations of what we think is going to be netting us the best result in terms of connection with audiences. And I think that there's at times when there may be moments where we forget, right, about different approaches to how we convey a situation. an audience, a piece of content, and that's something that we all have to constantly remind ourselves of.
I think, I mean, the data piece in agencies is, it's a real block sometimes. I think in terms of content, you have, to Bill's point, there is a safety element to it, but if you're not careful, increasingly you end up with content that tries to speak to everybody and by definition speaks to nobody.
Right.
And some of that comes from some of the data that we use. And there's been an obsession about first-party data, audience data for quite a while now. If you're mac and cheese, you don't need a lot of data to know that most people like mac and cheese. And so you kind of decide, well, what does my mac and cheese stand for? And like, what are the moments where I think it might be good, where I can grab an extra share of that particular moment because of the way that I talk? And we've spent an awful lot of time, especially in the last 5 years, obsessing about identity data and not thinking enough about what's the brand meant to stand for outside of an identity. You can't appeal to everybody. And sometimes the most polarizing brands and sometimes are the most successful brands because they're not trying to appeal to everybody, when they'll charge a premium for the 20% of people who love them and don't really care too much about the 80% who don't. And I think we lost our way a little bit with some of the obsession with identity data, because frankly, a lot of it isn't necessarily honest anyway. And we can't use real first-party data in the ways that we would like to. So, yeah, we kind of lost a little storytelling, and everybody's just become the average in some categories.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like it's over the last 15, 20 years, that sort of data story sort of informing what we do, it really sort of, it diminishes. I think sort of as we optimize things from digital experiences to imagery, brand, visual, those types of things, I think that we optimize things, but I think we slow down to a halt. So we can improve something forever. But I think the degree in which we improve something, it really starts to look the same, which is if we're looking at that image, sort of the most popular images from 2023 through 2025, it's rinse and repeat a little bit. And I'd also say that these are probably appropriate images for us in, say, like a very large stock library that we need to have in our brand image library, when we need to talk to mass audiences and things like that. So I think that's fine. And I think for, Fortune 50 companies that need to talk to people at scale, I think there are opportunities where we can be more intimate, and we can be much more, we can sort of understand our place, what we need to say, how we can help with different communities. I think on a mass audience, it's always going to be like this. I think I was talking a couple of days ago about that project. It was an art project that was done a while ago, but a couple of people, Kamal and Melamid, they did this sort of people's choice painting where they surveyed people across the world to sort of get the world's most popular painting. And it was what you'd expect. It was lakes and mountains and sort of deer and things like that. So I think that's what we're sort of seeing here. And I think there's certainly, there's always a need for it if you really are having to just sort of talk to everybody. I would say that the photography is not doing the heavy lifting in that case. You'd really want sort of a message or something else in your brand kit to really sort of resonate. And there are times where imagery that's not the role of imagery. But there's certainly times where if we're talking to smaller communities, we have FirstNet, which is sort of a first response network that AT&T built purely for that focus. But we shoot those first responders with ride-alongs. We know photographers that have sort of firefighting accreditation so that they can sort of do ride-alongs. So I think, and the same thing with sort of smaller culture, community events, I think there's just the ability to have a roster of people that are embedded have a point of view and can reflect that in how they actually sort of shoot visuals and people in certain situations. So I think it's a spectrum. A brand as big as ours, I think that there needs to be sort of a range of expression. And I think that photography is no different, but we are definitely looking at ways to avoid that sort of that dull sameness that is sort of the most popular image. It's just always going to look that way. So how do we distinguish ourselves, and when is the right time to do so?
Yeah, it's something, there's so much there, so much richness that you sort of surface. And I want to really zero in on the sort of misuse of data to make creative decisions. I think that's something I've been in this industry 15 years. We've almost outsourced some of our decision making and our stances that we've taken as brands to data, and to optimizing for using that data. And I almost think this moment is causing us to come back and return to creativity in a way that we haven't been, I think, as a collective industry, really radical ways. There's pockets of that, but we haven't really been as transformational maybe as we could be. And I also calls to mind this, this almost caution. I was on a panel the other day talking about AI and whether or not it makes things faster. And one of the panelists said, AI doesn't make things cheaper, it makes things faster. And so if you might generate a first draft more quickly, but the cost is going to come out in the amount of edits and the amount of time that you're spending on refinement. And I think that's a similar story of how we've used marketing data historically. And I think this is almost like this moment for us to kind of take a stance and double down on creativity, double down on craft. I think that's kind of what you're all alluding to, and making more bold and intentional choices when it comes to storytelling.
There's a risk element though, which is, I think we've trained out of marketers to a certain extent. If you look at before 2010, 2015, there were lots of marketers for a while who'd been very, very good brand builders. And then the internet came along and everyone was like, well, what do I do with this thing? And then you ended up with, I'm dating myself here, but you've ended up with a generation of marketers who in many respects have grown up in a D2C model. So they've actually inverted how they think about building brands, because you stick $1 in the machine, you sell a thing, and we're off to the races.
Dave, why are you yelling at me as a millennial who and entered the industry post 2010? I don't understand it.
I just mean there's a very simple correlation. And it's funny, I've met more marketers running brands in the last probably 5 or 10 years, like, right, I've kind of hit diminishing returns for the machine now, but I need to build a brand. And building a brand is softer metrics, it's not as predictable. Sometimes you have to go. We actually had a brand we were working with a couple of years ago, and we showed them the limits of the business if they just optimized what they were doing by sticking dollars into the machine, and literally ran a model that said in, I think it was like 7 years' time, they'd be advertising to 3 zip codes because that was where the money was. So you've got to start filling the funnel from the ground up and bring in people who are new, different. This is where I think content is actually a bit of a hack for innovation, because we've spoiled consumers in some respects with anything from fast fashion to the speed that different SKUs turn around. And books like How Brands Grow that talk about most of your growth is light, medium buyers who come in and out of a category is true. But the hook for those folks is sometimes innovation, and it's very expensive to keep producing a new SKU or a new product. But sometimes, because of the way media and content works, you can just innovate through the way that you represent yourself, and people will be like, oh, wow, that's good, I'll go buy that. And you just have to get into this cycle of using content as an innovation hack without butchering your brand, so that you don't begin to stand for too many things. But I do think data as a negative force for growth has really come through people focusing way too much on D2C dynamics and not having the risk being risk adverse about saying, well, we're going to do this thing over here and it might bring in some people, but it might not. And I can't sell that into stakeholders in the same way that I used to be able to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's about learning, sort of rewiring ourselves, I think, for this sort of new era. And I think that's incredibly important. And I think, data is just one signal, one input to make a decision. It is not the entirety of your sort of decision-making apparatus. And so again, that brand building, some of that's going to take a lot of risk, and increasing that risk tolerance. And there is a reason the adage is if you build it, they will come. I think if you're staying consistent and true to what you, the value of what you do, they will come.
Without wishing to overdo the data, there's different ways of using it. I mean, we worked with a brand 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Literally built a private marketplace in YouTube of a broad range of people who represented the customer. So we don't really care about them being the target audience. We're going to build 6 pieces of content and we're just going to throw it into this private marketplace and see what they love. Each piece of content represented what the brand was meant to stand for. And then we let the ad tell us who the target audience was. So the data can still work. It's just not being blinked about the way that you use it. That was genuinely a case of, this is the best way to creatively represent what we stand for because everyone loves that. And that was the catalyst for a far bigger campaign.
Really powerful. Oliver, Bill, do you have any other examples you'd like to share of work your team has done, either using data differently or sort of meeting or exploring this moment differently?
Yeah, I think there's certain topics that we've grown to lean into that we've recognized that whether it's folks in our competitive set haven't taken advantage of, and that really resonate both with even our target prospects, but also just generally with audiences beyond that prospect set for awareness' sake. That's helpful for us too. And in terms of, how we bring imagery to life, video assets to life for those, it is about making sure there's a good, genuine feeling that isn't overproduced as well, whether we're capturing our own thought leaders. But a big topic is also, even when we're producing content around AI or robotics, which are big themes currently, how much should we be leaning into AI solutions for asset generation as well, and making sure that what we are doing is for the right reasons and balanced with something that is really very authentic, whether that is our own thought leaders and how they speak to those topics. I think we all see a lot of kind of what we would consider slop out there in terms of what companies, brands are putting out there. We see negative reactions from audiences around some of those risks that they take, and those are important to learn from as well. And particularly for our younger audiences, right? They can really clock a lot of that very quickly and have a very negative reaction to it, and are actually seeking out more analog authenticity represented in what's served up to them.
All right.
I think we're currently we're assessing our image library. We do a whole raft of things, from brand shoots, which I'm in on, to custom content through Getty as well, which is sort of accessing. You can be very specific that way and also get a lot of variety. I think it works for some projects. That's new to us. It's also a huge cost saving as well, because brand shoots are not expensive, are expensive, I should say. And then I think there's always going to be stock imagery, because we can't, our team is not ginormous. We can't oversee and art direct every single stock, every single image selection. And our reach is very wide. And to Dave's point, there is sort of a lot of kind of substitute A for B, this message, that image. So I think there's a need for sort of big libraries. I think how you sort of represent a brand, but also, hand in hand, I think we can sort of start to dial up, well, how can we be more distinctive? How can we try and sort of show slice of life, authenticity, but not look like everybody else. Try and not look like those 3 photos that you showed, really just to stand out for no other reason. But I think sometimes we're just looking at sort of art direction. I think we used to like no art direction. Now I think there's some art direction that's, whether that's straight on flash photography, whether that's using color or post and color palette that's complementary with our brand color. I think all of that stuff sounds superficial, but I think that it's really just to sort of try and stake out a different visual territory. And we don't have an answer yet. I think that's sort of a conversation that's still going, and we have to keep reassessing it all the time. And then on the other end, we have pressure as far as sort of efficiencies and things. AI generated imagery is a big one. Right now, our stance is we don't use it for anything customer facing. We use it for all sorts of things, and I think it's improving, and we'll always revisit that point of view. But right now, I think the amount of prompts and the sort of literacy of prompts to get something that is consistent for us, that's really hard to manage. And also there's the legality side of it. And also there's sort of similar to stock libraries. I think it's sort of imagery done by a brief. I think sometimes it looks like the brief is showing. You're not seeing a slice of life. You're seeing an amalgamation of sort of popular high value tags. And I think AI generated imagery is sort of the same. What's that, Bill?
Checking as many boxes as we can, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it's trying to sort of continue to operate as a brand at a big scale, but also see where are those opportunities really to sort of have a visual point of view and stand out a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what jumps out when we see that, popular images. And we've done actually this exercise even within the finance industry with Bill, and that was sort of the catalyst for some of this conversation. But what you see pretty consistently is a real kind of consistency in sort of color palette and tone and style of imagery, right? And what that does is it washes out everything, so nothing stands out. And I think I really love that playfulness, that experimentation that you're talking about, Oliver, where you're thinking about playfulness and intention, with flash photography or other styles of color palettes and things like that, and points of views and perspectives. It really speaks to the fact that we're right in the middle, I think, of a powerful visual reset and an opportunity for a visual reset. Our creative team are thinking about culture and the world of visuals writ large, and our focus is really on tactility and going back to the principles of the craft of making photographs, the craft of making films, and things that can only be slices of real life, things that feel really sensory, and just a world where there's all of these sort of new and rules, about photography as well. AI can only train on what's happened before, so it can actually introduce new techniques. It can kind of play a little bit, but there are going to be still limits there. And so how do we really, really invest in that, in the power of craft? What are the shifts that you all are seeing? What are the things that are top of mind for you, that you feel are like relevant for your sort of individual roles or industries or organizations?
In this area of particularly AI, I think we're having to relearn, if you like, how artistic creative is going to need to blend with things which probably feel a bit more like SEO objects. Like an ad is going to have to do a number of things, and that's possible from a technical perspective. But as 80% of our attention is really informed by algorithms, and the distribution of a lot of what we do as brands is informed by algorithms, we're going to need creative objects. Are almost like a bit of a Rubik's Cube. They're going to do certain different things in different places and spaces. That might be to turn up in different ways, which is all doable with creative management platforms, etc. But I think, to Oliver's point, we're having to mash up what felt like different lanes for people in the past. Writing copy, art direction, performance. Those things felt like they've lived differently, and everybody kind of passes the baton along. We're going to have to relearn quite a few skills. And there's AI, certainly for the media industry, less so the creative industry, but for the media industry, we've had people for the last probably 15 years in very, very, very important engineering jobs, which are frankly just a case of wiring up the internet, because the foundations of that are really built on sand. And the big upheaval in the industry is going to be, how do we lift those people out so they can now think and do different things, think horizontally, think about how content needs to work, how we need to build things. And it's going to come quickly, but some of the people that we need from a creative perspective don't necessarily, you can't just take them off the shelf, and they're not in a Rolodex of a recruiter. We're going to have to build them. So a lot of what we're struggling with at the moment is, how do we kind of almost build these academies, start teaching people new things and get them to cross-pollinate skill sets. So it's going to be exciting, but it's just going to feel a bit intimidating for folks, I think, on a creative side.
Yeah, that change in ways of working in both tool sets and disciplines, and what cross-team collaboration in marketing looks like, has definitely been a big focus here. And how do we change that? A lot of it is kind of building that as we're driving it, for sure, at the moment, and cutting our teeth a little bit. But
I feel like we're having to talk to sort of the different teams and business units that are very much about really giving us updates, almost sort of a live feed of like what's capable right now, understanding sort of the best use cases for a lot of this technology. I agree, there's sort of a mashing together of skills, which I think probably is sort of maybe it's a faster trend, but it's the same trend that's happened in the course of my career. I think that everything just seems to be sort of at hyper speed, but maybe sort of heading in the same direction. I am optimistic about it. I do think that as far as photography, right now, there's no cost case for it, which is just photography isn't that expensive. I think as far as brand shoots and things like that, we'll always need custom shoots because we have very specific needs that we want to go out and shoot. And I think that right now there's not an alternative that Gen AI photography presents to us. That will change, but right now it's not the biggest cost to savings. There's other ways, probably process, idea generation, all sorts of other things, production as well, on the lower end of the spectrum. So I think right now it's really just educate as fast as possible, know the people that are doing the same thing, and stay informed sort of every month, because the goalpost keeps changing.
Thanks. This has been incredible. I think I want to end with some final thoughts, some rapid fire piece of advice that you'd have for your peers about meeting this moment. Who wants to start?
I'll go. I think, a big focus for me is just educating, right? And really making sure that you're understanding the landscape of how these tool sets are changing, the ethics behind them, of AI too, are something that's been top of mind for me. And I think, to my team members, it's really encouraging them to do the same. And if you're not always, kind of innovating and being introspective, and challenging ways of working, that's something that you really need to think about, right? In order to stay relevant, in order to produce, I think, work that is the most genuine and welcoming, also challenging and diverse perspectives in any of the work creatively that we bring to life.
I would say don't be intimidated by this world we're coming into. In many respects, it's going to get easier. I mean, in the Wayback Machine, I would sit with a creative and say, right, we've got a 30-second television commercial. We can say 3 things. We got 15. We can say 1. And then how we're going to build a story arc for the way that campaign comes together. It's kind of the same principles we're talking about here. It's what Oliver said. It's like, everything that's old is new again. It's different technology. A lot of the things that felt intimidating and clunky about technology and the internet, will go away. And I think if you put your foot down and say, no, I'm just going to do this one thing, that's the dangerous place to be, because that's what AI is good at. Taking things which are repeatable rote tasks and automating them. You can think horizontally. You got an appetite to learn. I think we're heading into quite an exciting world, so don't be scared of it.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, and Tristen, you talked about this before, which is sort of that craft, doubling down on that. I think people want to see that human touch. That's what resonates with us. I think we're wowed by the technology, and it is impressive. And I've also seen really lovely creative direction, art direction in video, in imagery, in image making. I don't think that's easy. Can you sort of back engineer it? Maybe. But I also think there's just sort of an originality, which maybe is sort of what sparked our careers in the first place, and a curiosity as well. So I think that craft doesn't have to be, oh, I hand drew this illustration. I think, that's changed over time. But I think that same with photography. I trained with a sort of Hasselblad and all of that kind of stuff. I love that. But I think that there's, it's really just sort of tinkering with technology as it changes. I think that there does seem to be sort of a common theme that has not changed. We're not doing a 180. This is just faster. And I think that curiosity and that craft is probably what's going to really help marketing stand out. And to Dave's point as well, I think there's a lot that will be automated. There's a lot that will just be substitute this, and this, but there is maybe that sort of constant, that is sort of that important creative insight. That is that stalwart, that's that sort of brand. This is what the brand stands for. Everything else can change based on algorithms, demand, context, that kind of thing. So I think as humans, we have a lot to offer still.
Agreed. One would hope, or we'll be out of jobs. But this was such a brilliant conversation. If I had to sort of sum up all of what you said, is to not at all be intimidated, trying to continue to innovate and be curious and really focus on that craft. So thank you so much, Oliver, Dave, Bill. I really appreciate it. I'm going to turn it over to Jen, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Thanks, Tristen. Get your questions ready. Our live Q&A is just moments away. We'll be back right after this. Hello, downloaders, and welcome to today's Q&A session. If you couldn't tell from the New York City fire trucks and noises in the background, we are 100% live today. Here with me are Tristen, Bill, Dave, and Oliver to answer your visual GPS chaos mode questions live. We have about 200 attendees. I want to welcome all of you and thank you again for being here live with us. As a reminder, you can put your questions in the Q&A section below. And while you're at it, why don't you say hello and tell us where you're calling from or writing in from. The floor is now open, and I see a few questions already coming in, so let's get to it. All right, everyone. We have talked a lot about cultural chaos, but how is all of this showing up internally? Are your teams asking different questions, pushing back more, or rethinking what good creative looks like compared to even a year ago?
I could answer that from a creative agency perspective. Absolutely. Mother has always been fundamentally about where does the creative opportunity live. I think what's been interesting to watch in the last 2 or 3 years is how the answer to that question has got really quite diverse. I think folks have spent a little time questioning, well, how do I navigate this world, given that creatively film, etc., seems to be the natural go-to. But no, I think people are kind of really fishing, especially younger creators, really fishing for very, very different ways to say, what's the creative opportunity here in ways I've not seen for a while, which is, as I say, what I said before, I think we're entering quite an exciting period.
Anyone else have any thoughts? All right. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I would say for us, we're producing a lot more content, right? We've focused away from awareness marketing into thought leadership franchises and the video space. And so it's really a shift in the way we approach how people want to consume and what's going to be most efficient for the reality of their attention span based on how much we're seeing out there. And so, it's caused shifts in our social strategy, our YouTube strategy, how we show up in different places as well has been a big theme.
Great. Got another really easy one here for you. When everything feels noisy and unsettled, what helps you stay grounded in your creative decisions? What is the anchor that you keep coming back to?
I feel like, and this is sort of, I think a lot of people, a lot of marketers think this, but it's obvious, but it's important, which is just start with the customer. I think there is a lot of noise out there. I think we can sort of be overwhelmed by all the choices we have and all the levers that we can pull as marketers or as creatives. So I think just start with the customer, the context, what mood are they in, what sort of frame of mind, and how is it right for us to show up? How can we help? What do we say? I think that's sort of just a fundamental sort of advertising sort of 101, branding 101. So I think that just helps get rid of the technology, understand what is it that's resonating with people and why, and to try and speak to that first.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to work with a creative director, a guy called Joe Staples. He always used to say, like, what's the truth of this situation? It's another way of probably saying what's the insight, but it's a slightly harsher, is that real? And he would always, before he started developing a concept, say, what's the actual truth about this situation? And I found that always, I use it now. It's a very grounding place to start from.
Yeah, we used to do the same in my previous life as a strategist at an agency. There was actually a section in the brief saying it's the human truth.
Human truth.
So maybe Joe Staples, there was some influencing happening horizontally, for sure.
Yeah, that was sort of the anatomy of like the first thought of it as a creative, which is just like the human truth was sort of the brand attributes and how can we sort of be relevant in this moment? It's sort of how do they overlap?
Love it. All right, next question, guys. Another easy one. How do you handle the situation where your corporate values and mission are directly opposed to whatever may be in the political propaganda machine?
Definitely comes up a lot. It's a big topic, and I think at least at my firm, we're lucky to have leadership that has really remained very consistent in our values and how we show up. But ultimately, there's a balance between that and also what that means in terms of how we externally market, what we do say and what we don't say. But a lot of our content is also tied to geopolitical events and political decisions that affect those factors in terms of people's investments. So it's definitely something we've had to talk about a lot. And so we're, again, very happy to have leadership that really does stay true to those values that we've had for many years now.
Great. And I think this might be the last question we have time for because we've had such a great discussion. This year marks America's 250th anniversary. At a time of such uncertainty, can this be a unifying moment for brands to leverage or a potential pitfall marketers should carefully navigate?
I would say yes, it is. I think it comes back to that truth thing. I think don't try and stand for too much other than just be clear about what you stand for. And human truth, how does that stitch various people together? I think there are interesting opportunities there, but I think it's coming back to your own North Star and how do you talk about it in that situation? Because it's a messy situation if you try and put a foot in any camp.
Yeah, I think it's the same thing, which is, you celebrate it in your own way. I think we're all American. I'm not. I'm Australian. It's the same type of thing. I mean, I have an inherent mistrust of people that are too patriotic. I think it's different in this country, but I think that we can all be patriotic. It's just in a way that feels right for a company or for a brand.
Perfect. And Australian will allow it. Um, that is all the time we have for today, everyone. Thank you for submitting your questions. Answers to anything we didn't get to today will be followed up within the next week. Thanks to our amazing star-studded panel, Tristen, Phil, Dave, and Oliver. As a reminder, you can catch all past episodes of The Download Presents, and Premium Access Live on demand over on our dedicated show page. If you have questions about visual GPS or anything we've covered today, contact your Getty Images representative or email us at thedownload@gettyimages.com. As you exit today's session, you'll be asked to answer a few brief poll questions. Please take a moment and let us know how you like today's program and what kind of topics you'd like to see us cover on future episodes. Thank you once again for being a Getty Images customer. We truly appreciate your business. I've been your host, Jennifer Kelly, and we'll see you next time on The Download.